All right, y'all. Welcome back to the show. It's Antiwar Radio. We're on chaosradioaustin.org, lrn.fm, antiwar.com/radio, anomalyradio.com, and God knows what else. Here's my recommendation to you, because I think it's important. You go check out consortiumnews.com. That's the home for the journalism of, a few favorites, but most especially Robert Parry. He's the author of Neck Deep, the Disastrous Presidency of George W. Bush. And I forget the rest of his books off the top of my head, but welcome back to the show. Bob, how are you doing?
Good, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing great. Oh, here we have Secrecy and Privilege, the rise of the Bush Dynasty from Watergate to Iraq, Lost History, Contras, Cocaine, the Press, and Project Truth. And I guess maybe most of you guys know, or hopefully Bob did the groundbreaking work on Iran-Contra in the 1980s for the AP and for Newsweek, and really probably is the nation's expert on especially GOP criminality over the last generation and a half or so. So really appreciate you joining us here, Bob.
Thanks for having me.
And now, I also really appreciate the fact that you have the spotlight article on antiwar.com today. Records cast doubt on Iraq surge. I suppose you've been digging through the WikiLeaks.
Well, there are a lot of them, so a lot of documents, so it's a little hard for us to do them all. But I have been going through some, and of course reading what has also been available based on them. All
right. So now, I guess I don't mind beating this dead horse because it seems to me like the slogan, the surge is working, and then the surge worked, was beaten into everybody's head as much as it could have possibly been by the Pentagon, a.k.a. the media, or I'm not sure where you draw the line in there, Bob, but that's the slogan, and if the surge worked, it certainly worked as a slogan, as a brand name that was sold to the American people, sort of like Barack Obama. But I wonder, it seems from your analysis here, you don't really buy that the slogan actually portrays reality, huh?
Well, no, and I think the WikiLeaks documents tend to show that there were a number of factors that fed into the gradual decline in violence in Iraq, which is a view that that we reported on previously, based on our own reporting, and that people like Bob Woodward uncovered when he was doing his book that dealt with the surge period, that many inside the U.S. Pentagon even were saying that this was not the case, that a lot of factors were involved, including the things that predated the surge. If you remember, the view of Petraeus' predecessors, Abizaid and Casey, were that by maintaining a smaller U.S. footprint, yet being aggressive in certain other ways, like going after some of the al-Qaeda leadership, that things would be brought under control. There was also the sectarian violence, which is now clear was also fading really by the time the surge got going, in the sense that there had been a sort of effectively ethnic cleansing that had occurred in Iraq. So the two sects, the Shiites and the Sunnis, had been rather very messily separated. There also been success in going after the al-Qaeda leadership. Zarqawi was killed in June of 2006, if you remember. And so you had a number of factors that were setting the stage for a decrease in violence, and they weren't always obviously good ones. There was an awful lot of simple wearing down of the Iraqi population through this endless violence that the Bush administration had unleashed on their country. There was a real desire among many Iraqis, as reflected in these new documents that have come out, for finding some kind of way to tamp down the violence themselves. So this whole myth that because George Bush courageously in January and February of 2007 ordered up the surge, and that General Petraeus went in and with the extra 30,000 or so U.S. troops and suddenly brought everything under control, was always been a myth. It was always a PR campaign mostly, and it was a way for the neocons who had of course, been a big part of the invasion and all the happy talk that preceded it, the cakewalks and how the U.S. troops would be greeted as liberators, et cetera, that they used the surge through their prestige positions inside the Washington media to say, gee, we've been vindicated. See, we were right. And then, frankly, Barack Obama, who had opposed the surge as a senator, was then pounded during the 2008 campaign by the media, demanding that he admit that John McCain was right about the surge. And Obama at first would say, that no, it's more complicated than that, which is sort of the right answer. But with George Stephanopoulos and Katie Couric baiting him and being constantly harassed, he, showing, I guess, some of the things we've gotten to know of him as president, thought that it was better to just give in and say, yes, the surge worked beyond our wildest dreams. So you had kind of this imposed false reality, which one might say, well, gee, why does that matter at this point? But the surge was then used to justify what's happened in Afghanistan. That is the escalation, secondly, another surge in Afghanistan, with General Petraeus, who was declared the hero and the great victor in Iraq, put in charge of Afghanistan. So we're seeing there are real results and consequences when a false analysis is imposed. And obviously, we saw one back in 2002 and 2003 with the certainty about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction. But in a way, the surge was another phase of that, where a misleading or incomplete or false reality was imposed on the American public, and it's had its consequences.
Well, now, you think it might be a fair analysis to say that when Petraeus talked about part of his mission being adding time to the Washington clock, that maybe that was really just the mission, that you had the Baker Commission and all this, where even, that was really the establishment, Sandra Day O'Connor and James Baker III and Vernon Jordan and all these people, and they were saying, let's get out by spring '08. And the American people had elected the Democrats, to the House and the Senate in order to force an end to the war in 2006. The American people were really sick and tired of it, and he needed to find a way to make it okay to stay forever. That was basically what the surge was about, wasn't it?
Well, I'm not sure the U.S. will stay forever. I think the Iraqi people...
but that wasn't the question. The question was whether that was what the Pentagon and the surge architects were up to.
Sure, I do think it was part of the real fear of George W. Bush and Dick Cheney was that they would leave office the perceived clear-cut losers, having lost a war in Iraq, and they didn't want that, so they needed to sort of stretch things out so they could let some of these other factors, which had begun, for instance, the Sunni Awakening, the turning against Al Qaeda, was occurring also in 2006 with the payments from the U.S. And of course the Sadr and the Shiite militias did a unilateral ceasefire. So there are a lot of factors that were already in play or going into play when the surge was starting. But it was a way to buy time and to change the narrative. And I think that changing the narrative was very important to the neocons in particular, because they needed to reestablish themselves as the experts on national security in Washington, which they had somewhat lost with the problems that the Iraq War had brought on. So I think you had a number of factors going there. But yeah, I think the idea was, how do you get this game to go longer, and how do you keep the American people engaged?
Mm-hmm. Now, there's the music playing, so we're going to have to go out to this break. But I want to ask you when we get back about the Sunni-based insurgency's attempt to make a deal. And I don't remember all the articles anymore, but I think one time, Bob, I went through and showed with different pieces of journalism from different times that the Sunnis had tried to make the same Antiwar Awakening type deal the entire war, 2003, 4, 5, and 6, and finally it was accepted in 07. We'll be right back with Bob Perry after this. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. It's Antiwar Radio. I'm Scott Horton, and I'm talking with the great